Hey everybody, it's Bust with the Eternal Season End Recap. Season End Recap for the Eternal Season. I wasn't certain if I wanted to put together a video like this at the end of each monthly Big Ballot cycle or at the end of each set. I'll have to kind of see how I feel about it later on down the road, but this felt like a reasonable and memorable time to put kind of a recap video together with the end of this inaugural Eternal Season. And it was certainly a memorable one for me, for my channel. It was the first season that we hit 1K LP on the ladder. It was the first top cut that we hit in one of the open events. It was all around pretty great season in terms of both fun and success. And so I can't really have any complaints there. And so to kind of continue on in that same vein, I feel like we got to give a high five to the LOR development team. I thought this was a fantastically fun set with Glory and Navori between both Standard and Eternal. Wonderful stuff there. I felt like the new cards were impactful. The balance changes and the balance patches when they hit were great. The introductions to the variety patches was pretty cool as well. And then even the stuff that's outside of the scope of the direct gameplay, and so the updates to matchmaking, the upcoming updates to the ladder ranks, whatever that's going to be. I think it's all very positive and well, even outside of the core set design, and so it's good. Like I think the near-term stuff was great, and I think that the long-term stuff has also been pretty great as well. I oftentimes describe what I call the World of Warcraft problem, as to where the World of Warcraft has been out there and in the field for 20 years. It has so many features that have been developed across all of that time between PvP and PvE and dungeons and raids and group content and solo content and quests and crafting and the like. You can go on and on and on about all of the features that exist in World of Warcraft. And so when you want to release a new game, you're often comparing what exists in your new game to a thing in the past. And so I think that, that's very easy to do. As you get a new card game like Legends of Runeterra, you compare it to Hearthstone, you compare it to Magic the Gathering, you say, wow, these games have all of this features and bells and whistles that don't exist in LOR. How do I feel about that? And I think that, the Riot dev team has continually shown that they're continuing to add to the game and improve the game. It's very impressive in both the short term and the long term. And so hats off, high fives, kudos, whatever you should be giving to those people, most certainly give to them. I definitely want to give my minor shout out to the matchmaking team. I know that that's something outside of kind of the core tenet of card design, right? And it's something that, is really integral to the course of the game. And as in my professional career, I do professional stuff. I can tell you loads and loads and loads and loads of nonsense that no one actually needs to know about specific websites on the internet, scraping data from them. Like, it's just a load of garbage that has no real value in the world. If we get sent back in time and have to do battle with the dinosaurs and stuff, nobody's going to want to know how to scrape a website as good as I can. I'm going to be one of the first ones fed to the dinosaurs while the true warriors go out there and survive. But I'm sure the matchmaking team can really just lay some insane knowledge on you about the struggles that you have having thousands of people push the join game button at the same time, and to link two of those people together of similar skill and similar play styles and similar collections without having them crash into 6 or 7 other different games. There just has to be an insane amount of stuff that goes into matchmaking, and that's one of the things that I kind of wanted to call out, that you're not normally going to be getting that kind of thing. I'm sure Ruben Zhu and Dave Guskin are getting all the high fives walking down the halls of the office, but I think there's some other people on the team that really deserve some credit, and hats off to you as well. And so, as we move forward, one of the big new additions to the Eternal season that I really wanted to call out and that I really liked was having this kind of play path in best of 3, to where they have the Ruthless Rumble. After the Ruthless Rumble, you have a week of just standard best of 3 gauntlets, and then the Runeterra Open event hits. You can play that Runeterra Open event kind of on your own schedule, and then if you do qualify through the play as you want to event, then you have to get into that timed top cut and the top 64, which really doesn't affect that many people. And so that was one of my kind of big gripes and complaints back in the days of playing in the seasonals events, as to where there would be the last chance gauntlet the weekend before seasonals, that was basically your last chance to play best of 3. And so if you weren't on a dedicated team, if you didn't have a Discord of friends to where you could test best of 3 with, you were just kind of done, right? You didn't get any more experience in the event, and you had to just kind of, do the best that you could with the ladder-based play. And I think that this really fills in a nice gap in these seasons, to where now you get the higher profile casual competitive event in the best of 3 Ruthless Rumble. The week between the Ruthless Rumble and the Runeterra Open is a week of best of 3 gauntlets, so you can still continue to test that way if you would like. And then you get that play at your own pace open event, which I absolutely love. You get to jump on whenever you have free time. In my case, it was on a Saturday, so we woke up, did some stuff, did some yard shit, and then played in the event for a little bit. I forgot to eat lunch on the day, so I paused my event. I went and ate lunch, took a little break, came back and played some more games and stuff. And so it's very nice not being into that space to where it's like, okay, well, I have to be here at 10 a.m. to play around, and then wait a half hour, and then 11 a.m. to play around, and then wait a half hour and have that take up your entire day. I really love that style of format. And so as we talk about the World of Warcraft problem, I feel like this is just an actual great thing to take note of, as the initial the initial implant into the game was nice. It was nice to see best of 3 added in, and then have it iterated on and improved and getting into this better format that I really enjoy. I think that's just a fantastic way to go about it. So wonderful stuff there. Really enjoy that set. So speaking more to the opens, I feel like there's 2 really kind of big topics to talk about in remainder of the opens. The first one is the concept of open deck lists. And there's an argument for open deck lists, an argument against them. A lot of people complain to when you have to play against a certain lineup and you didn't know you were supposed to play around a particular card, then you come in and just get smashed by that card and it really hurts your feelings. Whatever, I don't really care about that aspect of it. We took advantage of it in our open event this week. We played Buried in the Ice in all of our decks. We had great success with it. A lot of opponents didn't see that kind of thing coming. Even taking it a bit further, a step down the road, Shadow X took this to the max. I think Ruben Zoo's done this nastiness onto the ladder before, but he comes at us directly with Samira Seraphine, and you say, oops, if you take a peek at this deck list, he's actually just playing discard Draven that has Seraphine in it. Then if you move on to the next one, he has this really delightful Nora Katarina Annie deck, but it's not that nonsense Lord Broadmain stuff you're going to be seeing usually. It's the Legion Rearguard deck list coming at you hard and fast. Last but not least, Trundle Set, hitting the lineup, the control component to the deck list, if you will. At the end of the day, actually just elusives, overwhelms, backed up by Spirits Unleashed and Battle Fury. And I absolutely love seeing something like this come up in the closed deck list portion of the event. It's fantastic that this is a strategy that you can take into event and have real success with it. I believe Shadow X most certainly made the top cut. I think he made it to the round of 32. And so props to you for giving a little hope to the closed deck list truthers. I think that there's those interesting aspects that come to it like that. The place that I don't like this open deck list kind of thing is in terms of scouting. And I'll go ahead and show you how to do it. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, is let's just say you head over to runeterra.ar, because you saw we're queued up, we're in the event. I got paired against FTP Bust. I'm super scared. Let's go load up FTP Bust in the search bar. Looks like he turns up. We can go to his recent matches, his recent events. It'll take some time to load. And as we scroll down here into the Eternal Gauntlet lobbies, you can see all of our decks, right? So here is Jax Ornn. You say, oh my goodness, he has Buried in Ice in this thing. That's kind of crazy. And then you can see our Vayne Jarvan. Oh my gosh, he has Buried in Ice in this thing as well. That's kind of crazy. What are you doing, Bust? And then you've got the Trundle deck with the timelines and everything. And so it's like, oh, wow, I just saw all of your deck lists. And so there is that opportunity to kind of come in and get that scouting aspect removed from the game. And now I suspect there will be some kind of fix for this in the future. I really hope that the fix for this isn't just saying, okay, yeah, well, it's closed deck lists across the remainder of these events. Like, if that's what it has to be, I get it. I think that there's, some merit to open and close deck lists in the events. I just wish that there was a way to shut this down. And so, whether or not that is closing off the matches API for a day, whether or not that's going to Runeterra.ar and saying, hey, we don't want you spreading this data on the day of the events. Wait until the next day before you make this stuff available. Whatever. Some kind of thing to where that this isn't possible is what I would like to see. There's always going to be, corner cases to the things. You got people on Discord sharing information with each other. You have someone that has wrote their own app that isn't popular and they just do it anyways. There's always got to be these ways kind of around it, but closing off that like 99.9% of the cases to where you can't just go to the most popular deck list website and type in a name and get all of your opponent's deck lists, that's what I would like to see removed. And so, again, your thoughts and feelings on open versus closed, don't really care. But if it is closed deck list, I think this kind of loophole needs to have a little bit of an effort towards shutting it down. Up next in the matchmaking whoopsies section, again, I gave some major props to the matchmaking team. I'm not trying to talk trash on you here. It feels like there's just a couple of things that have also made their way through this one. And so in terms of the ranked ladder, I know that in this season, in the Eternal season, I hit Masters in the first week, and then we hung around in the top 100 throughout the entirety of the season. But I would say even in the days leading up to the Runeterra Open, that probably like 10 to 20% of my games were against people that were just like bronze or silver or gold, and they weren't people that had that Masters rank from standard in a previous season. And so if you have a deck tracker loaded up, at least the mastering Runeterra, whatever that deck tracker is that I use, is up. It gives you your opponent's kind of current ladder rank. It's locked into standard right now, but you can see, oh, this person hit Masters in standard. They're currently in gold, but they're probably capable of being a Masters player. They're just kind of new to the format. But like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about these were people that were just like legitimate gold players that we were getting queued into when we were in the top 100 of Masters. And so I think that that's probably just some holdover, some carryover from the matchmaking previously, to where if you queue into a normal, I would say that that's how the matchmaking probably gets handled. It tries to make a best effort to get someone close to you, but takes speed over quality as kind of a precedent, and I think that that's kind of what we ran into there. The way that people complain about this more and more so, though, is in terms of the Runeterra Open, and this happened to us as well. I can pull it up on the Runeterra.ar. I'll just say you could pull it up on my account on Runeterra.ar. I don't really want to put the last two opponents I had in the open rounds on blast. I don't want to make it sound like I'm talking trash about them. Like, as I was recording the open live, I was really trying to kind of like reel myself in, because I realized that these just weren't players that were up to the experience level that we had, and it was highly unlikely that these players had actually had 8 or 9 wins at that stage of the open event. And so if you notice me acting like kind of awkward in my speech in the Runeterra Open videos, that was why. I was trying to not say things that would imply that these opponents weren't up to the level of quality that we have reached these days. And so I know a lot of people are throwing kind of like shit fits over that, because I had to take a more challenging route to the top than someone else did. I'm trying to be the best in the world, and I couldn't overcome some low-level Masters players, so my life is over pretty much. Get that nonsense out of here. You don't, just it is what it is. The thing that I take it as is, if that's like legitimately what's happening, is that the matchmaking can't figure out how to find an opponent fast enough, and so it's just giving you an opponent. If that's what you have to deal with, you have to have a few players throughout the course of the event play against players that aren't up to that top tier quality. If that is the payoff for having this super smooth and super nice event structure, then to me, I think it's worth it. But I would say at the end of the day, that's something that Riot will work on and hone in and kind of fix. It seems to me that the thing is, and what it feels like is, say that you have like 6 wins, you're 6-0, and it's trying to find you a 6-0 opponent. It can't do it quickly, so it starts to look towards, say, like 5 wins or 7 wins. And then if it can't find you someone in between that window quickly, it tries to look to 4 and 8. Like, it seems like it kind of branches out like that. And what it kind of feels like to me is, once you're up to, say, like 8 or 9 wins, it says, okay, let me find an 8. If you're at 8, it says, let me find a 7 or a 9, and then you get paired whatever. But then when you're at 9, it says, let me find an 8 or now a 0. And it feels like it kind of overlaps onto both ends, but the overlap on the top end scrolls back to the bottom, is what it kind of feels like. But as we've said, I think the matchmaking's great. I feel like Riot is really improving day by day, hour by hour. I think all of this stuff is well and good, and I have really high hopes for what's coming up in the future. And so, up next, I wanted to talk a little bit about the format itself. And you're always in this kind of interesting and weird space when you're in this land of incorporating all of the older cards. The thing that I've kind of presented here is what I kind of look at in terms of having a fair and balanced and fun format. I come from the lands of Magic the Gathering. I think it was Brian Kibler that kind of put forth the idea that if Baneslayer Angel is a good card in a format, then you probably have a relatively interactive and fun format for people to play in. It's not some kind of like ridiculous combo covered format. It's something to where people are putting creatures onto the board and those creatures are getting into battle back and forth, and you're having some kind of interactive unit style game plan happening. Same thing kind of applies to Dr. Boom if you're out there in the lands of Hearthstone. It's just a big dude that puts a lot of stats on board that has some kind of interesting and mild effects that happen off of his summon ability. He was in kind of that same space, right? If you're in a land to where Malagos combat decks and Miracle Rogue are really just taking over the format because it's so super fast, if you're having problems with things like Barnes into Yasiraj, those are all things that are just like way more super powerful than Dr. Boom can ever stand toe to toe with. But if you're in the format to where you can say, oh yeah, maybe Dr. Boom is actually playable today, then the pacing of the format is probably good. There's probably a lot of unit-based interactions, and you're probably in a fairly safe space. And that's where I come down here to the lands of Garen and Ornn as we cycle back into our lands of the Legends of Runeterra. I feel like if we are in a format to where Garen and Ornn are both reasonably playable, I think you probably have a pretty healthy meta and a pretty healthy format on your hands. And so, as we've seen with this format over the past month, the Ornn deck is one of the real top contenders of the meta, and I think that that's like a pretty good place to be in. If you can just show up to an event and have Ornn be good, that's probably pretty good. If you want to go out of your way to beat Ornn, you can do it. We talked about this extensively over the course of the past week. If you want to play a deck like Rise Ionia that has all of this single target bounce and stuns and ways to stop your opponent's really big unit, you can come in and just have an absolutely horrible matchup for Ornn to have to battle. But if the majority of the decks, the majority of the games are putting yourself in a space to where this just like 7 cost do nothing unit that just puts a bunch of stats on the board is actually good, then you probably have a pretty reasonable, fair and balanced format that isn't just getting blown out of the water by Ezreal. It's not getting blown out of the water by some combo deck. It's not getting blown out of the water by Nami based elusives or whatever. You probably have a fairly interesting format that involves putting champions on the board and have those champions do Legends of Runeterra, League of Legends style things to each other, right? You're out there blasting your Q key onto each other, and your champions are leveling up to their ultimates, as opposed to your opponent just dropping a flipped Ezreal on the board and nugging you for 20 at burst speed. And so that's my kind of thought and view on the format. I think we made it through this initial month to where Ornn was healthy, and I feel like that's a pretty good thing. And so, to continue on with some more thoughts on the format, I did want to put forth some ideas and thoughts on balance. And the first one I think that all of these should come to mind, at least these days, is Samira. And now, I haven't played Standard in the past month. I've exclusively played Eternal. How she stands in Standard, I don't know. It sounds like she's still probably overtuned. It sounds like Samira Fizz is probably still just the best deck in the format. I don't have any answers to that. I don't have any thoughts or feels on it. If the best thing you could be doing in the format is Samira, that's probably a fairly healthy format as well. But in terms of her in Eternal, I think that she's been fine. There is a ton of ways to just deal 2 damage to a unit. There's a lot of removal spells that do that, a lot of combat tricks that make it much more reasonable to do. There's a lot more 3 health units in the early game that can just shut down a lot of these Samira-based plans. I felt like over the course of Eternal, she was pretty healthy, and I think it was also interesting to see decks that you thought like really wanted to have Samira in them, things like Draven Scion, actually being better playing units like Vi as opposed to Samira. And so I think she was good in terms of the Eternal game flows, the Eternal feels. She feels like she's, just a good champion in Eternal and not probably over the top like she is in Standard. And so, if she gets rotated after a year or something to the lands of Eternal, I think that she can pretty safely live in this space that she's at right now. Up next, though, I have what I thought is kind of the watch list of Eternal. Things that don't feel super overpowered right now, but are things that you got to kind of like keep in mind as we roll into the future. And so up in the top left, we just have the Forge mechanic. I feel like Forge starts to get into the space to where it can be kind of like concurrent timelines light, in the sense that are you getting too much stats for free, or are you getting too much stats at a cheap cost? And I think it's going to be a real delicate balance with Forge, because items are fantastic, right? Equipment are fantastic. They tie in thematically with the idea of these units getting together and battling in combat, right? I come to battle with my giant sword. It makes just a lot of sense in terms of these fantasy lore kind of ideals. Also makes a lot of sense in terms of League of Legends in general. If you want to go back to the parent game, to the core, you take your champion, you go out there, you battle against the opposing champions, you kill some creeps while you're at it, collect gold, you head back to the shop and you buy some items before you go back into battle. And so, items are kind of baked into the parent game. They're baked into the kind of core feel here. I think they really have a place, but you do have to kind of watch to what would be the Stoneforge Mystic problem in Magic, as to where you could just play Stoneforge Mystic and Batterskull in literally any single deck, and it was just so super overpowered. It was nutsos, but Stoneforge Mystic had to be the kind of considering factor to equipment throughout the course of the game. And so as Wizards was trying to balance out the cards, you would have the choice: do we need to do something to Batterskull, the singular equipment, or do we need to do something to Stoneforge Mystic, the card that is actually causing the problem and limiting us from making better equipment in the future? And so that's what worries me a little bit with the Forge mechanic. I feel like in the global sense, the thing that's the most fun for everyone is having these unique and interesting equipment come onto board. If you want to start to add Infinity Edge into the game, or Gensu's Rageblade or whatever into the game, that's going to happen at some point, and those are going to be equipment. And so do they get pushed over top because of the Forge mechanic? I don't know. And so it's something that I think will have to be kind of carefully crafted and tuned. It's something that I suspect can cause problems in the future, but as it stands right now, it felt like probably the best mid-rangey thing you could do in the format, but not over the top. Things that probably are over the top, up here in the top right, a little bit covered up by my beautiful mug, but the Feel the Rush set interaction feels like it is probably just a little bit too much. If I had to say that there was one thing in this meta that should have blown up but didn't, it would be Feel the Rush set. And if you're not familiar with this interaction, you play Feel the Rush. You've probably spent the 40 mana by the time you've played Feel the Rush. If you haven't spent 40 mana by then, spending 12 mana of the pathway to 40 mana gets you really close to flipping. So you play Feel the Rush, it brings out Set, it brings out your other champion, which is probably Trundle, but maybe Karma. There's arguments for other ones. And now that flipped Set is put onto the board by Feel the Rush, he's seen that you've played 12 mana worth of cards in the same turn, and then he immediately puts the Showstopper into your hand. And so having that kind of combo roll through is pretty big time, in the sense that if you do even have the answer to the Feel the Rush, or you have the answer to one of the champions, you're still having to deal with the Showstopper at the end of the day, and it's ultimately pretty oppressive and is easily the most powerful thing you can be doing in terms of spells in the format. And so you do have to tie that kind of end to Trundle, and Trundle generating Ice Pillars, the Ice Pillar costing 8 mana but immediately giving you 8 mana back, making it much easier to activate your set, and then also tying in with things like the Old Timer, as to where you've spent 8 mana, the Old Timer sees you spend another 8 mana. After his ability goes on the board, you bounce all the opposing units. So there's a lot of combos happening within the Feel the Rush set. I don't have an answer to what would kind of fix this. What do you like? Just saying Feel the Rush costs 13 doesn't fix it. Saying Feel the Rush costs 11. I'm on board because I do like casting Feel the Rush, but that doesn't seem like the answer either. Fixing sets Kit to where he doesn't get the showstopper through this sequence. Maybe that kind of fixes it. I don't know, but this is the one that I would say should have been Degenerate this season, but wasn't. The last card to call out is Atrocity. I think that Atrocity is still kind of like pushing the edges of being too much. Getting it nuked down to 6 mana slow speed was, probably enough to really remove it from the land of relevance. But now that it's back and you're running into the Nasus decks and the Tristana decks that are able to Atrocity for like 14 plus damage pretty consistently, it's one that I think you probably need to keep on the watch list as well, as the potential just too much coming out of a singular card. And so the thing that does kind of tie me into things like Atrocity not being as bad as, say, Feel the Rush, is that with Atrocity you can really kind of like tune your removal to maybe interact with your opponent. And so even if you're playing something like Freylord that doesn't have real removal within the faction, you can still like flash freeze the opposing unit to counterspell the Atrocity. There's a lot of play to it if you really need to stop an Atrocity, not so much in the terms of Feel the Rush. But the last cards we're going to be talking about here are ones that I think to either just need to be fixed, removed, or banned. The first one on the list, Concurrent Timelines, currently hot fixed to 2 mana. I had a lot of feels about the way that Concurrent Timelines was handled this season. There's kind of two splits to how I feel about Concurrent Timelines. On the one side, I think it's great that Riot came in and did it. I think the devs realized the card was about to be nutsos. The Mastering Runeterra event happened. The person that got first played triple timelines. The person in the top 4 played triple timelines. It was really lining up to be a path to where these opens were going to be dominated by timelines. Riot stepped in and said, well, we're going to nerf it back to 2 and see how things go. I think that that's good and well and fine. My problem was the community reaction. And there is just a very vocal portion of the community on Twitter that went fucking nutsos over the concurrent timelines at the event, just bringing in this kind of sea of negativity. And if you're kind of limited to like the competitive Twitter scene, then whatever they can see it, that's fine. But when you start like bleeding over into the general subreddits of the lands of Legend Runeterra, just bringing your just toxic attitude in, that's where I start to kind of like have some problems with how this went. And so my ultimate concern with seeing Riot drop a hotfix in the middle of the kind of balanced cadence is it kind of reinforces that idea that, oh gosh, I just played an event at the beginning of the season. I lost to theme X. I'm going to go to Twitter and start bitching about it. I'm going to go to Reddit and start bitching about it. Might even go to Facebook and bitch about it. Who knows? Might even load up Nextdoor or Grindr, wherever I can do maximum bitching. I'm just going to start doing it. And it really just spreads that negativity throughout the community. And that's not what I like seeing reinforced. And so it's been kind of like a tough spot for me in timelines. Like, would I have rather Riot just waited and just let us just deal with it for a month? Kind of maybe, I feel like Drissoth did quite a bit of work in terms of bringing forth elusives. I feel like there's other decks that emerged that could have combated timelines, but at the end of the day, it happened. I just hope it doesn't set the precedent amongst the community reaction for the remainder of the way. But my thoughts on timelines, at least in terms of Eternal, get rid of it. Just take it out of the format. Just say we're done. We made a mistake. We don't want this around. If you don't like that idea, if you think it's a little bit too harsh, Drissoth has provided some feedback on a potential thought for the timelines. I like this quite a bit, to where he's kind of proposing that the timelines ends. And so you play the timelines, you get it for 3 or 4 turns. At that point, the timelines are over. You play a secondary copy, which you would typically just be discarding away. And you can't get into that kind of space to where you play the timelines on turn 2, and then on turn 8, you play an Ice Pillar, right? It kind of cuts that out. You have to decide, do I want to play this early and help my early game? Do I want to play this late and get high-powered stuff? Has a lot of interesting things kind of tied into it. I think that was a fairly interesting response to what we could potentially do to timelines. I think it's safe to say this was a mistake and just get rid of it. And so however you feel about that, you are more than welcome to feel that way. Up next, we have Ezreal. Ezreal is a real kind of bummer to me. I know that he hasn't popped off at this point of the season, but to me, this is just a time bomb card. There are a few cards throughout the course of the game that are just absolute time bombs. They are just complete garbage until they're not, and then when they're not, they are just ridiculously oppressive. The card I always point out is Jay Medarda. You probably don't know what Jay Medarda is. You've probably never seen him because he doesn't see any play. He's like a 5 or 6 cost unit. Every time you target him, you draw a card, and so it's not going to see any play. His stats are way too bad in a faction that has no targetability going into it, but that day that Jay Medarda is actually good, he's going to be involved in some kind of combo deck that targets him over and over, draws your entire deck, and combos off your opponent into a way they can't stop. And that's not going to be any fun. And so, as it stands, I call him as basically a time bomb as to where he's not any good until he is. And that's pretty much where Ezreal is, but Ezreal has been kind of bonkers throughout the course of the history of the game. His flip ability of just chaining off a bunch of spells and ending the game at burst speed is dumb. You run into a lot of these spots to where you are at 20 health. Your opponent has like 3 cards in hand. They have a back alley bar on board, and they're like, LOL, watch this. I'm going to OTK you from 20 with like pretty much nothing in my hand and nothing you can do about it because it's a burst or fast speed. And so I think it's just ridiculous. I think that, Riot really hit it on the head in terms of taking Ezreal's league kit and bringing him over to Runeterra. And so he has that dash kind of ability, which ties into elusive. Great. He likes to throw mystic shots over and over and over again. That's tied in here with the Nexus Strike, adding mystic shots into your hand. And then he gets, I think he reduces the cost on his mystic, or reduces the timer on his ultimate True Shot Barrage whenever he connects on a Mystic Shot. I don't remember entirely, it's been a long time, but whenever he connects with his Q, he gets some kind of bonus. And so they really kind of like hit it on the head in that sense. And so once he's connected on all these Mystic Shots, once he's got all these targets, he gets to flip and do something spectacular. But just because it was executed well doesn't mean that it actually plays out well. And so I don't actually have a great answer for Ezreal. I thought the thing that we kind of propose on the screen is kind of neat. It still fits in the kind of the same vein. If you target 3 enemies with separate spells, so you don't get your 3 targets off of the singular Make It Rain, then he flips. Then as he flips, he starts generating True Shot Barrages instead of Mystic Shots, and then your targets still tie in into making your True Shot Barrages cheaper. And so, take it, run with it if you want. I don't care. As Ezreal stands, I don't think he should be a part of the game with this ridiculous level 2. Just go ahead and take him out before that ridiculous deck is found, or some other new card comes in and makes the Ezreal OTKs much more ridiculous. Last but not least, we do have Seraphine, and this is another one that I ultimately think is just super frustrating. She has too much going on for her, and so the way these cards are to me is that they have to have some kind of weakness at some point, right? And so if you think of a Seraphine as being a 1/4 for 2, pretty good blocker. She summons a card to your hand as soon as you play her. That is a very good early game unit, right? We've gone through this phase of every card in the game is some kind of 5-stat 2-drop that generates a card. We found out that that's just a little bit too much, and so that's really kind of honed back across the days. Conchologist now a 2/1, Reggie now a 2/1. And so then to that end, if she just had some kind of like bullshit level up in level 2, then that would be kind of whatever. You're still getting a pretty good value out of that card. Say she flipped and generated a level 2 or a 2-cost summon every turn the rest of the game, whatever. Like that's, not incredibly oppressive. It's something that's good early, kind of good late, but not overall too much. But her like double spell ability is pretty obnoxious, especially in the sense that she doesn't have to be on board to see any of it happen. It just kind of naturally progresses throughout the course of the game, and then you can be like, oops, it's turn 9, I'm going to play this thing and then just double all my spells the rest of the game. And so I think that that's kind of an obnoxious note as well. There's no point in the game to where you say, okay, Seraphine is weak now. Seraphine, doesn't have a very high power point here. She just has, you don't have a power spike when the entirety of your lifespan is the power spike, right? And so I kind of feel like she either needs to have her health dropped so that she's a little bit weaker in the early game. She dies to Get Excited. She dies to all the 3-power challengers. She's susceptible to Pestrocyte Broadwings and the like. There's a lot more that you can do to interact with Seraphine in the early game if she only has 3 health. I think that would be reasonable. Or, like, what else are you going to do? You're just going to sit around and keep, like, ticking up this you've played new spells thing until it gets too far along? I don't know. I guess you can make it to 10 plus, whatever. That makes it a little less oppressive. Or you can retool it a little bit to make it more stringent on Seraphine surviving, so she can't just show up on turn 9 and say, LOL, it's time for the Song Spinner, let's double it all up, to make her at least have to see all the spells that you play to count towards her level up. Like something along those lines. One of those two, I think, is probably necessary to have her be reeled in and not as obnoxious, or you can try and touch High Note as well. Having her flip into a very powerful removal spell is kind of meh, and so if you want to take away some of the initial power of High Note, make it require a lot of new spell stuff happening to get the full power, that should be a thing. And so I have, complained about Seraphine endlessly over the course of the channel. It's one of the cards I just absolutely hate. But to a degree, I think I should say, I think that her flip is fine. If we're thinking of things as we're approaching, turn 8, turn 9, turn 10, that's when you should be able to come out and do obnoxious stuff and just end the game. That's why I've always been fairly happy with Karma's flip. If you're getting to turn 10 of the game, you should be able to do obnoxious stuff. I think Seraphine's there in that same kind of vein. And so I don't think in the terms of like Ezreal that she needs a full like re-kit. She needs a full retool to get rid of that double spell thing, even though that is pretty obnoxious. I think that she needs either a more challenging path to get there to where you can't just landmark her on the board at the end game and say, LOL, here it comes. And so tough stuff there. But otherwise, I scrolled through everything. I was trying to think if there was anything I would like to switch around on the buff end of the spectrum. And the only thing that came to mind to me was the Elite Dog. I'm curious to see what comes of the Elite Dog in the upcoming sets, as we're clearly going to be getting a lot of animal themes. But I felt like it would have been kind of nice if there was another kind of mid-rangey basic component to the game that isn't just the Forge deck, and Elites typically fills in that space. And I feel like Elites isn't really competitive at the moment. I feel like the reason it's not competitive is that that dog getting nerfed, and so it needs another just kind of cheap play to really tie the room together. And that's the only one I can see without new cards coming in. But otherwise, I think it's been it's been a pretty diverse format. The maximum play rate on any of the decks was only like 5%, and so really wild and crazy things going on out there. Definitely not a rock, paper, scissors meta by any stretch of the means. And so, again, well done. I applaud the Riot Squad. We had a pretty good time with Glory in Navori, Glory for Navori, whatever we're calling this one. And really, hats off to all of you. And so, good stuff. That is going to do it for us today. I had a good time. I hope you did too, because that is going to do it. So I hope you maybe learned a thing or two along the way, and you had a good time watching. This is Bust, and we thank you for being here.